thing. Amanda, thank you very much. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour as well. Really happy to have you here. So on July 10th, 1940, the German Air Force started its large-scale attack on our closest overseas ally, on Great Britain. That was the start of the Battle of Britain. And at that point, Great Britain was the last man standing in Western Europe. The Germans had spread out into Austria and then into Czechoslovakia, and then they took Poland and Denmark and Norway and Belgium and the Netherlands and Luxembourg and France. Nazi Germany was just rolling through all of those countries. And at the end, Britain was it. Starting July 10th, 1940, the might of the German Air Force turned its sights to destroying and ultimately trying to take Britain as well, because they wanted all of it. They wanted all of Europe. And at that point, the United States had to decide what we were going to do. Here was not just our closest overseas ally, but here was the last country standing in the way of total Nazi domination of all of Europe, which is what Hitler seemed to want to use, not only for its own ends, but he seemed to want to use that as the cornerstone of a global Third Reich, Nazi world domination. And here's little Great Britain standing as the last thing between them and control of that continent. So what were we going to do? What President Roosevelt wanted to do was help our ally, help Great Britain stand up to the Nazis, help them hold the line. FDR expended a huge amount of political capital to do that, and also just capital, money, to send Britain as much support as he could manage, short of us getting into the war ourselves in 1940. That's what FDR did. That is what we remember the United States doing as a country. But at the time, it definitely wasn't like a consensus decision. That is definitely what President Roosevelt wanted to do, but lots of other people in the country did not want to do that at all. Remember that date, July 10th. That's when the German Air Force started attacking the British mainland, July 10th. Exactly 1 month later, on August 10th, 1940, a sitting U.S. senator gave a national speech on the radio in which he demanded that England should say thank you to us. They should be way more grateful. They should show us some respect. Frankly, all our allies should, for all that we've done for them. And it was time, frankly, for them to start paying us back. That senator's name was Ernest Lundeen. He was a senator from Minnesota. And in Congress, he had formed something called the Make Europe Pay War Debts Committee, which said that we shouldn't be helping our so-called allies in Europe at all, because, frankly, those allies, especially England, they owed us. They owed us money from the First World War, money they hadn't been able to pay back yet. We should focus now on making them pay us back rather than us giving them any more help. I mean, who cares that they're being invaded and attacked by the huge Nazi war machine, which has already invaded and taken over the whole rest of Western Europe? Not our problem. We should be collecting right now on what they owe us for helping them already the first time around. In no way should we be giving them any more help. Ernest Lundeen was actually so into the idea of the Make Europe Pay War Debts Committee that he formed a second committee with a similar name that focused specifically on how they should pay their debts to us. His other committee said that they should pay their war debts to us by giving us their islands. Islands for War Debts Committee. That was his idea. Our allies are in the middle of being invaded and bombed and occupied by the Nazis, but this seems like a good moment to see if we can get some stuff off of them.
Seizure of the islands may be necessary, as was once advocated by Andrew Jackson, our great American president. Danish and Dutch, British and French island possessions in America, all must become American. In the meantime, our debts are piling sky high, approaching $50 billion, with a $6 billion deficit this year.
Yeah, see, we've got these debts. They owe us. Let's seize their islands to cover some of their debt to us. Let them fight off the Nazis themselves. They owe us. We shouldn't be helping them anymore. Less than 2 weeks after giving that speech on the radio, Senator Ernest Lundeen was dead in a mysterious plane crash. When they pulled his body out of the wreckage, they found in the pocket of his jacket a draft speech that he had been planning on giving in the United States Senate that was kind of along the same lines as that radio address. Definitely don't support our supposed allies as they are fighting Hitler. Who cares about whether or not they can fight Hitler off or not? What's so bad about Germany anyway? That was the draft of the speech in his pocket. He never got a chance to deliver that speech because he died in that plane crash. But that speech that he had on him, that he had in his pocket when he died, turns out that speech was written for him by the Nazi government, by a Nazi agent, by the Hitler government's top paid propaganda agent in the United States. Turns out that Senator Ernest Lundeen was being paid by the Nazis. He had been on Hitler's payroll the whole time. Hitler's government was paying him to argue in Washington, to use his position as a U.S. senator, to make this case to the American people that we shouldn't be helping our allies fight back against the Nazis in Europe. We should instead focus on getting them to apologize to us for not being able to pay back everything we did for them in the First World War. We should be getting them to show their gratitude to us now by figuring out what they can do, what they can give up of their own resources to prioritize paying us while they're fighting off the Nazis or whatever. That happened in August 1940. How was your day today?
I have been told by a senior official here that nothing's going to happen with this minerals deal until Zelensky goes in front of cameras and makes an explicit public apology.
85 years ago, in 1940, Ernest Lundeen was just a senator. He wasn't the president or the vice president. And ultimately, we did not adopt as a country this proposal that Hitler had stuffed into his mouth with a wad of cash, this proposal from him that we should refuse to even dig a grave for our allies, that we should not only refuse to help them, we should pile on them, make things even harder for them than they already were. We did not go along with that. Ernest Lundeen died in that plane crash. Not long thereafter, he was exposed as a paid Nazi agent. And then he quickly was forgotten. We didn't choose his course 85 years ago. We chose to go with what President Roosevelt wanted to do. We chose a very different course. And in so doing, the United States not only stood up for our allies and stood against the Nazis, the United States became the leader of the free world. And now it is 85 years later. It's 2025. We're 6 weeks into Donald Trump's second term as president. And our ally, Ukraine, doesn't have any islands to give up to us. But they do have minerals, I guess, that we could take off them, that we could mine. And so under Donald Trump, our offer to our ally, Ukraine, as they try to fight off an invasion from Russia, our offer to them is that they should be so lucky that we would deign to take all of their minerals. They'd be lucky to get such a deal with us. In fact, they'll only even get that deal. They'll only get the privilege of us taking their resources off of them if they grovel for it. But even then, maybe not. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot to get to just tonight in this hour on this show. We're going to be talking tonight about the protests all over the country this weekend at national parks and at national historic sites as Trump's massive and indiscriminate firings of the federal workforce have led to the first announcements that some parks will be closing down and no longer open to the public, even though those are our parks and our land. From the protest that was held today at NOAA, at the National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, where Trump has inexplicably fired meteorologists and the staff at the Storm Prediction Center and staff at the National Hurricane Center and the technicians who maintain radar systems for the Weather Service and the people who staff the Modeling Center that is the foundation for all our national weather forecasting capability. We will have more to come tonight on the protest today and this weekend that targeted the president's top campaign donor at some of his many businesses. The president has given his top campaign donor the right somehow to fire whole swaths of the United States government. Lots of protests against that campaign donor all over the country this weekend. We'll be taking a look at some of that, as well as the protests targeting the vice president when he made a genius decision to take a ski vacation in Vermont, which is apparently a place he has never Googled. One of the remaining senior officials at USAID clicked send on a report this weekend just before he was fired. The report detailed that agency's assessment of the consequences of President Trump and his top campaign donor just shutting off U.S. humanitarian aid and foreign aid full stop. USAID's assessment of what that will cause is a harrowing list, including nearly 28,000 new cases this year of highly infectious hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola and Marburg. 200,000 children this year paralyzed with polio. 18 million new cases of malaria this year. USAID says we can also look forward to a 30% global rise in multi-drug resistant tuberculosis just this year. A single case of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, just for perspective here, costs about $150,000 to treat. We'll have a 30% rise in multi-drug resistant tuberculosis worldwide this year. Nicholas Enrich, acting administrator for global health at USAID, was told this weekend that he was being fired. He then clicked send on those reports. So even though he was being pushed out, at least the country would know what they are doing there and what the consequences may be. And now he has gone from that job. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot to cover every day, increasingly with each passing day. But I got to tell you, even just since Friday, since our last show Friday night, the litany of things that have happened, the litany of things Trump is doing specifically for Russia is a list that would make Ernest Lundeen blush. I mean, you might have seen the show that we did on Friday night. Even before today, even before this weekend, we had the Justice Department making a major change. Justice Department prosecutes foreign agents under the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Trump Justice Department announced they will no longer enforce the Foreign Agent Registration Act. The FBI and the Cybersecurity Division at the Department of Homeland Security, they both have election security units that monitor and combat foreign influence operations specifically targeting our elections. Under Trump, that FBI task force and that part of CISA, the cybersecurity agency, have both been shut down. Trump's Justice Department has also announced that it is closing its unit that seeks to enforce economic sanctions against Russia. Task Force Klepto-Capture is now gone. Russia kicked USAID out of Russia in 2012. Vladimir Putin has sought since then to demonize USAID and to try to get USAID kicked out of as many other countries as he can. Well, Trump decided that USAID would be the first agency he and Elon Musk would target to fully shut down. Last week, Trump specifically shut down the American project that helps Ukraine keep up its electrical grid. Keep its electrical grid up and running as Russia has bombed it and attacked it over and over and over again during this war, specifically to try to freeze the civilian population to death in order to force Ukraine to surrender. Before last week, the United States was the major source of assistance to Ukraine to keep its electricity on, to keep that grid up. As of last week, Trump has withdrawn that help. At the United Nations, under Donald Trump, we sided with Russia and against Ukraine and all of our allies when it came to a resolution marking the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Trump now says that Russia should be allowed back into the G7. Trump sent a high-level delegation, a U.S. government delegation, to meet with the Russian government in Saudi Arabia. He says he's looking forward to meeting Putin himself in person. Maybe he will invite him to the White House. I fully expect that he will. Trump appointed a new director of the FBI who was recently paid $25,000 to appear in an anti-FBI propaganda film made by a guy who has been paid by the Kremlin to make pro-Russian propaganda. In his first day on the job at the FBI, he announced that he'd be moving 1,500 FBI agents out of Washington and that he'd mostly be working from home in Las Vegas. Also, that nobody has to wear a suit anymore at the FBI. The New York Times reports that he also, in his first meeting with FBI agents, seemed to not know that intelligence and counterintelligence are two different things. Quote, Mr. Patel used the words intelligence and counterintelligence, quote, interchangeably, suggesting that he was confusing them, according to half a dozen people familiar with the call. That's FBI. However, how are things going over at CIA? Well, at CIA, they are carrying out the largest mass firings in 50 years. And then they sent a list of CIA employees to the White House in an unclassified email. CNN now reports on a new naval intelligence document which says our foreign adversaries, including Russia, have, quote, directed their intelligence services to ramp up recruiting of U.S. federal employees working in national security, targeting those who have been fired or who feel they could be soon. The Washington Post now reports that at the National Nuclear Security Administration, among the people Trump mass fired and then belatedly tried to rehire were people, quote, with Q-level security clearances, which gives them access to America's nuclear secrets. Nuclear nonproliferation experts in Washington warned of the risks of firing such workers who have knowledge that is highly valuable to rogue states and terrorist groups. One senior Trump advisor has now publicly suggested that the U.S. should break up the so-called Five Eyes intelligence sharing arrangement that we have with our closest allies, including Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And again, these are all things we ran through most of these on Friday. But honestly, just from a news show's perspective, you need a whole team just assigned to this beat of how fast is America becoming Belarus? I mean, I know Trump's in a hurry, but at this point, I mean, we're just deciding whether we're going to be called Trumpistan or Ameristan. Which one polls better? I mean, either way, 6 weeks into this term, what is on President Vladimir Putin's wish list that he is not getting? Trump is inviting the Russians to establish a full diplomatic presence in the United States once again, to reopen their embassy at full strength and all of their consulates. Headline on that at CNN, Russia sees talks with U.S. as an opening to rebuild its spy networks. The cybersecurity publication Recorded Future was first to report this weekend that Trump has now told U.S. Cyber Command to stand down in all of its operations targeting Russia. From the New York Times, quote, over the past year, ransomware attacks on American hospitals, infrastructure, and cities have ramped up, many emanating from Russia. Sabotage efforts in Europe, including suspected Russian attempts to cut communications cables, mysterious explosions, and Russian-directed assassination plots, have also accelerated in the past year. The U.S. until now has been central in helping European nations fight back, often in covert cyber operations. But now, that cooperation could now be in jeopardy, with, again, U.S. Cyber Command being ordered to stand down its operations against Russia. Yesterday, Mike Turner, Republican congressman, former Intelligence Committee chair, told Face the Nation on CBS, hey, that can't be right. They asked him about those reports. He said he was, quote, certain that the Trump administration could not possibly have told Cyber Command to stand down on Russia. But yeah, believe it. In fact, they have. Tonight, they demanded the resignation of the chief of the FBI's New York field office, who spent most of his career investigating or supervising counterintelligence cases. Tonight, he has been forced out. Tonight, U.S. stock markets have tanked because we are imposing huge tariffs on our two closest trading partners, on Canada and Mexico, as of midnight tonight. We're also, for some reason, sending Stryker Brigade combat vehicles to our border with Mexico, while threatening to send U.S. troops over the border and into Mexico. Tonight, Reuters reports that the White House has told the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Treasury to start removing sanctions on Russia. And tonight, of course, they have made it official that we are full stop cutting off the aid we have been providing to Ukraine. The aid that Congress approved and that Trump therefore does not have the legal power to stop. But he is stopping it anyway. Again, Ukraine doesn't have islands that we could seize, but presumably, if they did, we'd have them by now. Who is this for? I mean, tell me who is the swing state voter in Pennsylvania or Nevada or North Carolina whose issue in this election was, I don't think Vladimir Putin is getting enough of what he wants. Tell me who is the median voter in some bellwether county in Arizona who thinks, you know what? Russian cyber attacks have gotten so bogged down and difficult. It's getting so it's really difficult to just ransomware a hospital in Arizona these days. Isn't there anything we can do to help with that? Is there a single voter in the United States who thinks that Canada is the bad guy in the world and Russia is the good guy in the world? And so let's threaten Canada and learn Russian. Is there anyone? Who is this for? And what did they do to get all of this? What has Russia given up to get this list of things that they have received in the first 6 weeks that Donald Trump has been back in the White House? He's the deal maker, right? What's the other side of the deal? This weekend, the foreign policy chief of the European Union said, quote, the free world needs a new leader. The rest of the free world is trying. This weekend, the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the President of France announced that they would form a new coalition of the willing to support Ukraine. And they hoped they might get support from the United States for that effort. The United States, our government, has changed sides in the world. And it seems pretty clear they will not be doing that. Our government now sides with Russia and against America's allies. And we spent years trying to figure out why the Republican Party and its new leader would be inclined in that direction. It now sort of doesn't matter. What matters is the new reality is that he controls the government, and that's the way that he has changed the U.S. government's orientation in the world. And it really is hard to imagine what else Putin might want that Trump hasn't already given him in just these 6 weeks. But you know what? The American people haven't changed. We haven't changed sides. We know who we are. And we know who Vladimir Putin is. Less than 10% of the American people say the United States should trust Vladimir Putin. It's not us. It's not the people of the American. It's not the American people. It's not the people of the United States. It really isn't us, but it is our government that appears to be under some kind of sway from Russia. That said, as long as we're a democracy, we, the people, should be able to fix that. We should be able to turn our government around. I don't know how long it will take or by what means it will happen, but the government of this country and the people of this country have two radically different ideas about whose interests the United States should serve.